Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report, the one and only Keiser Report. Let's find out what's happening in the world. Stacy.
Right. Well, basically, Max Keiser, the hash wars are here. You have been warning about this, and this is a hash wars that you predicted quite a few years ago would happen between nation states as they seek to acquire Bitcoin and start mining Bitcoin. And we're getting into that in the second half of this first half. But first, I want to say, there's also signs that there is in general, with that hash war, there's a race to hard money. And that is seen in this first headline here, Max, is China preparing a gold-backed yuan. Beijing greenlights purchases of billions in bullion. In 2018, the Chinese launched a gold-backed yuan denominated oil futures contract. These contracts were priced in yuan, but convertible to gold, raising the prospect that the rise of the petro yuan could be the death blow for the dollar. 2 weeks ago, the IMF reported that the global share of U.S.-denominated exchange reserves dropped to 59.0% in the fourth quarter. According to the IMF's data released today, this matched the 25-year low from 1995. And now they're basically the People's Bank of China has okayed basically unlimited amounts of gold to be imported into China for their banks.
Right. So this all started with the news, really, in the Biden administration about infrastructure spending, a lot of money printing, about possibility of MMT, modern monetary theory. That would be a lot of money printing. We have debts skyrocketing in the U.S., which is going to require even more money printing. So right now, there's a quid pro quo. There's a symbiotic relationship between China and America in terms of the currency war, the currency grid. So the U.S. sends China all their jobs. China sends America all the dollars that they get for all the products that they sell at big box stores like Walmart. And there's a bit of equilibrium there. But what China is seeing is, as the world reserve currency U.S. dollar now at 59% of transactions, as you point out there in that statistic, it seems like it's going to go lower and lower and lower. Once it goes under 50%, then you can no longer claim it is a relevant world reserve currency. So they're preparing for that. They're preparing for that in three ways. Number one, a central bank digital currency they've already announced. Number two, they are opening the importation of gold again. They do this periodically. Hundreds of tons of gold are now finding their way back to China. Number three, they've reversed their position on Bitcoin, as I said that they would, as I said that they must. Because if they want to escape U.S. dollar as world reserve currency, if they want to escape the ability of the U.S. to censor the dollar and apply sanctions whenever they want to control the world, while they're printing all that money. It's not necessarily that China disagrees with America's foreign policy or that China disagrees with America's domestic policy. It's that China disagrees with America's monetary policy. They don't want all that money printing. So a few things are going to happen. Number one, it's a hash war or a global race to procure as many Bitcoin as possible now on the geopolitical level. China is leading the way. This is the Sputnik moment for Bitcoin. America can enter the hash race or it can be left behind. Number two, as I've said very, very publicly now for almost 2 years, the central bank digital currency of China, when it is issued, it will have some backing, if not outright, partially in gold. That's what will make it very, very different than any of these other projects that are being announced. And that will allow something to happen. The dollar can collapse, but the gold and Bitcoin will rise commensurately. So it gives them protection against a collapsing dollar. The China is saying, sayonara, we're no longer attached to the dollar. And this is the beginning of the hash wars.
Yeah, well, I think the hash war in 2021 is what the opium war was back like 100 years ago during the British Empire days. As they acquire hard currency, Bitcoin and gold, a lot of it is to do with they see the Thucydides trap. It's not just us here on Keiser Report or, people that we read online, heterodox thinkers. Obviously China has to see it themselves. They must realize that since it was revealed that they're far ahead in high tech, like 5G and now 6G and artificial intelligence, that there would be some consequences to that. So how do you protect yourself from sanctions when, you own $4 trillion in your reserves and you own, all sorts of bonds from America? Well, then you have to make sure to protect yourself, holding gold, holding Bitcoin. So in terms of the gold, according to Reuters headline, China opens its borders to billions of dollars of gold imports, that there will be 150 tons imported in the next month. By May, they said that it should be reported about 150 tons at the private banks, their import. But in that story from Zero Hedge, what they had pointed out in terms of the central bank digital currency, just last week, China became the first major economy to unleash a central bank digital currency, cementing its trailblazer status in virtual currencies far ahead of other countries, after already recently experimenting with large-scale trials of actual payments by consumers, which was met with mixed results. Also last week, Peter Thiel warned that Bitcoin should also be thought of in part as a Chinese financial weapon against the U.S. It threatens fiat money, but it especially threatens the U.S. dollar.
Right, it does threaten fiat money, as we've been saying on this show for 10 years, actually. So, yes, China realizes that the U.S. dollar's days are numbered, and it probably will collapse pretty soon. And yes, they are importing now hundreds of tons of gold. What's not being talked about, which is my unique prediction at this time, is that the new central bank digital currency will have a reference or a backing by gold. And this is why I don't totally dismiss gold. And I'm not in the camp of, well, Bitcoin is going to demonetize gold completely. No, I think in the case of China, which is the biggest economy in the world right now, they're going to transition to Bitcoin through a path that is laid with gold bricks, right? They're not going to go yuan Bitcoin. They're going to go yuan gold Bitcoin. It's going to take a few years. So gold still has a place out there for that very reason. And the U.S., Peter Thiel is a bit of an alarmist here, saying that China is taking an aggressive stance. China's not taking an aggressive stance. China's doing just what an average business person would do if one of their vendors is going belly up. They would take precautions against it. The U.S. can stop themselves from committing financial aside against themselves if they want to. They seem to be preoccupied with other things, but you don't blame China for doing the obvious thing.
Well, I mean, you could say that the U.S. is doing the obvious thing, too. If you know you're not going to be able to pay your debt, and I've seen loads of friends or a family go bankrupt, and what do? When they know they're going to go bankrupt, you rack up a whole bunch more debt as fast as you possibly can while you still can, and then you shut it all down. Because why not get an extra 100,000, 200,000, or in this case, $200 trillion worth of free stuff and free goods? So it makes sense there. But in an event of a reset, it's not just us saying it. It's not just China acting toward it. And it's not just the United States racking up debt in sort of preparation for it. The IMF is saying we're going to have a great reset. Davos man is saying we're going to have a great reset. They're all preparing for it. They're telling us, they're warning us if you just listen. So if in that sort of circumstance, of course, you would hold gold that has been around for 5,000 years, and you get your hands on whatever Bitcoin you can get your hands on, because that will certainly be very useful for for somebody like China, especially. They export huge quantities of goods and services, so especially goods. So if you're exporting like that with large quantities, Bitcoin is a great settlement layer. So there might be a new settlement layer, and this might be, there are alternatives popping up to SWIFT, but, Bitcoin is the one that's tried and tested.
Right. Make a good point there. That there's an enormous amount of trade, and that is the global settlement layer. The transaction is the verification. The transaction is the settlement. You don't need a third party. You don't need the new Fed of New York. You don't need the American banking system at all. Remember, all transactions around the world, particularly in the commodity markets, they must go through the New York Fed, downtown in Manhattan, every single transaction. So anytime the U.S. wants to apply sanction against any country, they simply say, well, for this microsecond 3 months ago, dollars went through our New York Fed system, therefore we're going to sanction you. And that's the trick they used against Iran. That's the trick they use against all these countries, because they've got a monopoly on this. And China and other countries are saying, you know what, game's over. It's not worth it to us anymore. We're not going to sell you really cheap stuff at Walmart anymore. And by the way, what's happening to prices for soap, soda, basics, gas, but they're going up. There's inflation because China is actually raising prices now because they're squeezing the U.S. economy in several different ways. And again, don't blame China, y'all. America could have stopped this themselves.
Well, we were around in the 1970s, Max, and back then, who caused the huge inflation? not only the war, but Saudi Arabia and the Arab oil embargo. Here, basically, all our goods come from one location, exactly, and that's from China. So it's a sort of squeeze as well. There's a squeeze on just the amount of ships that could possibly send, because they're the only manufacturing base out there. So in terms of that Bitcoin headline, I'll read that. After a Bitcoin crackdown, China now calls it an investment alternative in a significant shift in tone. China's central bank is now calling Bitcoin an investment alternative, marking a significant shift in Beijing's tone after a crackdown on cryptocurrency issuance and trading nearly 4 years ago. Industry insiders call the comments progressive and are watching closely for any regulatory changes made by the People's Bank of China. And this was said by Li Bao, who is the deputy governor of the People's Bank of China. He said this last week at a CNBC forum in Asia, and he said, we regard Bitcoin and stablecoin as crypto assets. These are investment alternatives. But the crackdown they did 4 years ago was on ICOs. So that was, those are fake. Those aren't, you can call them cryptocurrencies or whatever, but they're not Bitcoin, and they're different centralized beasts.
Right. All sovereigns go through. Great Britain is going through the exact same thing right now. They announced something called Britcoin, right? So they go through the pantomime of saying, oh, we can do better than Bitcoin. We're going to create our own sovereign coin. And then after a few months, they'll realize, oh, my God, this is a disaster. It's just more centralized garbage. We have to join the Bitcoin race and do the hash race. Venezuela went through this already with the Petro. That's similar to the Britcoin, is the same as Venezuela. Petrocoin, it's the same mentality, because the bureaucrats think that they know better. They jump, they try to create a competitor, they lose, and China's already been through it. They said, maybe we're going to do our own coin, et cetera. Now they realize it's the Bitcoin standard, it's the global Bitcoin standard. They're really to adopt it. They're hoarding Bitcoin right now. China can emerge as the ultimate Bitcoin winner. America needs to enter the Sputnik moment hash race right now and start to hoard Bitcoin. I beg you, America. I beg you, Joe Biden, please don't leave us behind. Don't leave us in the gutter and prices skyrocketing and eating worms out of the street, Joe. Help us, Joe. You must buy Bitcoin, Joe. I say that from the heart of Satoshi. I'm channeling Satoshi, Joe. I hope he listens. My God, what a disaster if he doesn't listen.
Well, I just want to say finally that I think that China is preparing for Bitcoin to be an international settlement layer, and their domestic currency, their digital currency will be a domestic-only currency, and it's not going to compete with Bitcoin. It's just going to be for local, disbursements of funds.
Yeah, it'll be a local coin, sure. Yeah, well, we were right. Everyone else was wrong, as usual. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to return to our conversation with Charles Hugh Smith. His website is oftwominds.com. Charles, welcome back.
Thank you, Max.
All right, so we left off talking about the parasitic elites and the overproduction and overabundance of high Ivy League diploma types. I guess we have the deplorables and the diplomables. We got a double problem going on here. I mean, some of these people, I see them hanging out at the coffee shop and they're reading the New York magazine, the New Yorker, and they're not laughing at those cartoons anymore, Charles. They're all weepy-eyed.
Yeah, Max, we've over the years we've talked about various revolutions, and so I wanted to focus on the cultural side of a revolution. Like, we're used to a political revolution where it's kind of meet the new boss, same as the old boss, or something like that, or a conquest, and then but a cultural revolution is different. And I've been thinking about the French Revolution, which you could say was a political revolution, but I think more correctly it was a cultural revolution, right? Because the monarchy was destroyed and replaced with a republic. And the China's Cultural Revolution, which didn't replace the political leadership, but it totally disordered the entire nation. And so I wonder if those two examples have any applicability to the United States today.
Yeah, well, I think the Chinese Cultural Revolution seems to be where we're heading in terms of the left is imposing their need for collectivism, and they eschew the idea of individuality, and they are not keen on the idea of private property, and they seem to be pushing for everyone to wear little Mao jackets and carry a red book, except in the portrait of Rachel Maddow. That seems to be the Chinese Cultural Revolution more than the French Revolution. How do you weigh in on this?
what I've kind of concluded is the cultural revolutions have two parts. The one that you just described, which is like extreme political correctness, that any deviance or dissent from the approved PR will bring instant punishment. And in the Cultural Revolution, this included beatings, imprisonment, or being killed, right? We're not quite there yet, but it's pretty close because you can be extinguished online, right? Your online persona can be eradicated. But there's another element to cultural revolutions, which is I think that they arise when people have no legitimate political voice. And in China, China went through a lot of hardship in the 50s and early 60s with the Great Leap Forward. And these were catastrophic mistakes instituted by the top political leadership. And so the people couldn't dissent because that, of course, would get you imprisoned. And so the only way out of that to express your dissent was to say, we're going to recover the revolution that the elites have left behind. In other words, we're going to be the true revolutionaries here because the elites have fallen by the wayside and have lost the ideals. And so this protected the Red Guards and the students in the Cultural Revolution because they could say, well, we're not making political problems. What we're saying is we want to recover the ideals of the Chinese Revolution. And then that was why they all waved Mao's Little Red Book, because that was their protection against being thrown in prison. It's like, hey, we're the good guys here, right? And so that allowed them the leeway to revolt and against all elites. And so this is why college professors and party cadres, every elite was under pressure and dethroned, in the Cultural Revolution. And so that sort of sounds like something that could happen in America is every elite will be dethroned because we're sick of the oppression and that they've pursued, right? Their dominance of the power structure.
Well, clearly you have a problem of an entrenched oligarchy with the media in the U.S. I just saw a clip of ABC newsmen. They got a hold of a record of some ambulance driver or emergency worker who made a $10 donation in an online campaign. They tracked him down and they went to his house and they didn't like the $10 that he contributed out there. And they publicly doxed him. They exposed him. They showed his address. And that's a page right out of Mao Zedong, right? So the only thing missing was the public beating. So I'm sure that'll come soon. But it's all at the behest of ABC. The media conglomerates, right? So they're now in the business of going out there, dragging people out of their home and stamping on their face to sell more, stuff during the commercial break. That's the difference, I think, between this Cultural Revolution and the Chinese one is that they had really bad marketing, really bad brands. There was nothing you could buy in China in the 50s except shoes, right? So here you've got a plethora of consumer goods to go with your face stomping. So, that's the upside. So now, all of this, of course, could lead to a hot war, and it seems like the rhetoric's pretty heated these days. Charles, do you see a hot war on the horizon?
Like an internal war between factions in the U.S.?
Well, I think more geopolitically because we're seeing a lot of saber rattling between China, the U.S., and other countries. We took out the easy targets of Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, where they had no defense. But we just went in there and bombed people and murdered a bunch of people. But we're running out of the easy targets. Now the targets are getting harder, and America's economy is crashing. They force themselves into going to war to feed the warmongers and the cable news anchors. How are they going to escape the fact? Are they going to really take on China? Because that's what the rhetoric seems to be. China's not Libya, Charles. Did they really think they're going to, have Hillary Clinton doing a dance of victory when they start firing shots at China? This seems a bit crazy.
Yeah, and I think there's a connection here to the Cultural Revolution theme we discussed earlier, which is we all know that what elites that are fumbling and struggling to maintain their power they love war because that's a unifying element, right? If you can create a war, then you can beat the patriotic drums and get everybody behind you, right? That's an old cliche, but it's been effective. But the problem is that doesn't work in a nuclear war. And so war is now the kind of war that the power structure wants, which is this long drawn out thing where they can beat the patriotic drums and get everybody distracted. Those wars don't exist anymore. Now wars are cyber wars, right? Where you try to take down your opponent's infrastructure. And so there isn't any political upside to this. You know, you can't get a patriotic surge here. Because when people lose their water and electricity and their internet because somebody hacked the system, they're not going to be feeling warm and fuzzy for the American power elites, right? And the problem, as you say, with rattling sabers with nuclear powers is mistakes can be made. And in fact, you know, there's a long history, if you look into it, that there were a number of instances on both the U.S. and Soviet side where we were really close to a mistake being made and nuclear weapons being launched, right? And cooler heads prevailed, but it was an iffy thing. And so that's what worries me. And it worries a lot of people that, you know, there's a lot of nuclear weapons on standby. And that's one of the dangers. The other danger is that it's not solving the problems of the world, right? I mean, saber rattling isn't getting us any closer to world peace or world prosperity, you know? And so there is a danger, and it's something that's worrisome. And we have to remember that diplomacy and finding common ground is a possibility if our leadership, you know, had the wisdom to pursue those.
Yeah, you know, atomic weapons seem very passé at this point. You know, the First World War ended on horseback and ended with airplanes. You know, World War II started with tanks, ended with atomic weapons. You know, I think World War III, because that's where we're headed, maybe there'll be some lip service paid to atomic weapons, but it's going to end with cyber currencies and Bitcoin. So China's already amassing Bitcoin. And that's how the World War III is going to end. He who has the most Bitcoin will win World War III. America hasn't even started yet, so I don't have a high hopes that we're going to do well in this one. Now, let me ask you this. You're probably in favor of deglobalization, it says here. Could we see a better domestic economy emerge, especially if China continues to overtake the U.S. in high tech?
That's an interesting question. I think we all kind of know that China is attempting to have a technology and internet sector, including cryptocurrencies, that's separate from the West, because we have to remember they kind of got on board the Western system and built up their wealth within the, you know, sort of aegis of the Western economic system. So now they want to create their own system and attract the rest of the world to their variation, right? And this is they're right? I mean, this is what powerful nation states always try to do, is attract allies and create a system that they control so that, you know, they're not beholden to somebody else. So that's obviously going to create competition. Competition, if it's transparent, is good, because when you don't have any competition, then you get a bunch of stagnant monopolies like we have in the US. So I think the world is better served by open competition. Now, this doesn't mean cyber warfare, right? Although that, as you say, that's the future. But if China creates systems that serve other nations better than whatever the United States offers, then it's other nations' right to go ahead and get what works best for them. And so that competition will, I think, be positive for the U.S., because maybe we'll have to get rid of our sclerotic, plutocratic monopolies and allow more competition within the U.S. economy and spread the capital and agency around instead of concentrating in the hands of the top 0.1%.
Yeah, you make a good point there. The U.S. should be honest with the people and say, instead of trying to vilify Chinese as being evil and we need to fight evil, you know, the U.S. leadership should be honest and say, you know what, we dropped the ball. China got ahead of us competitively. They're leading in a number of industries. You know, all hands on deck. We got to go to work, or we're going to slip way behind. Let's compete. Let's do it that way. That would be great. And people would respond. They'd be like, yeah, let's do it. You know, I'm going to go down to the factory and make a chip. Just start a microchip plant. Let's work. Let's do something. Let's compete. We're Americans. So it's really insulting, you know, for a lot of people when the leadership of the country resorts to the narrative of American exceptionalism, and we can afford to be fat and lazy. We got about 10 seconds. How do you feel about that?
I think you've summarized it extremely well. And, cryptocurrencies have a lot of room to run, and we need to get on the ball there.
And if you're looking for good recipes, Charles Hugh Smith's up2minds.com is an excellent resource for that as well. He's an excellent cook. He's got excellent recipes. Look at him. He's a handsome man. Do you think he got that way by not eating well and making great food? Charles, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Max.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Charles Hugh Smith. The website is up2minds.com. Until next time, bye, y'all.